and organization. All participants, kindly rename your display names on Zoom. Include your full name and organization. Also, while the session is going on, we kindly request you to keep your microphones on mute to avoid any distractions or disruptions. However, the floor will be open for questions and answers after the speakers' presentations, and you may engage through your microphones and even switch on the cameras according to your preference. Should you have any other queries, please feel free to send us a direct message through the chat box on Zoom. I will now briefly touch upon how this webinar will proceed. We will begin with the opening remarks by Dr. Ibrahim Hassan, Minister of Higher Education, Republic of Maldives. After that, brings us the session on data for policy. Today's session will be moderated by Mr. Enrico Gavitia, UNDP Resident Representative in the Maldives. Our speakers for the day are Ms. Asta Kapoor, co-founder of the Institute of India, Mr. Alexander Okranenko, Head of AI Regional Innovation Center, UNDP Asia Pacific, and Ms. Sanyukta Samadar, Advisor on SDGs at Niti Aayog, Government of India. After the speakers' presentations, we'll have a dialogue with the moderator and speakers, which will then be followed by the Q&A session. So without further ado, I would like to request Dr. Ibrahim Hassan, Minister of Higher Education, Republic of Maldives, to present his opening remarks. Dr. Ibrahim Hassan.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Mr. Enrico Gaviria, UNDP Maldives Resident Representative. Mr. Alexandra Opronero, Head Regional Innovation Center, UNDP Asia Pacific. Ms. Sanyukta Samadar, Advisor, Government of India. Ms. Asta Kapoor, Co-founder, Agpi Institute, India. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to you all. It gives me immense pleasure to welcome the key representatives from all government bodies to this Visioning Maldives dialogue session. Public sector institutions, policy makers, and policy implementers play an important role in the processes of a nation's vision building. As the stewards of development, you have technical expertise and accurate understanding of citizens' concerns and needs, and the resources and stakeholders to mobilize the services that address those needs. Your presence and participation in this dialogue today shows your passion to envision the Maldives you want and your commitment to deliver that vision. The pandemic caught all of us by surprise, but in the long run, we have learned so many valuable lessons from it. Small countries like the Maldives were able to cope and survive due to our willingness to learn, to try new things, and to adapt and thrive in challenging circumstances. For the higher education sector, the pandemic demanded the colleges and universities to adapt quickly to a paradigm shift from traditional face-to-face and/or blended learning to completely remote teaching and learning. This is a challenge posed to the entire world. All sectors had to manage our databases remotely and effectively without bringing our services to a halt. Hence, in the face of the pandemic, we have collectively realized the need for planning and policy tools to better navigate an increasingly complex world. We need to embrace innovative tools to capture emerging opportunities and mitigate risks. Data is a strategic asset, and data analytics capability is a capability we need to build within the very layers of government to position the Maldives to be anticipatory and future fit. Actionable data and analytics is a valuable resource from policy design to implementation to monitoring and learning. If we can realize the value of data and harness it, it can enable more responsive policy options, better planning outcomes, better informed strategic decision-making, and learn what works and what does not. We will be able to respond and deal with the big disruptions of the future in a proactive way. and leverage the big opportunities to shape and realize the future we want. Given that higher education, training, and skills development is inherently linked to other sectors, especially the labor market, use of timely data such as skills demand, emerging and declining sectors in the economy can enable us to design responsive policy interventions such as upskilling, reskilling, and lifelong learning programs. To give a simple example, when I assumed office in 2018, there was insufficient data to provide us with a clear picture to shape our policies. So one of the first major tasks of this government was to understand the skills shortage of the country. So during the first 100 days, we conducted a training needs analysis across all sectors of the Maldives. Since then, we have collected detailed data on training needs from all government departments and officers for the next 3 years. This allowed us to streamline scholarship opportunities and student loans to the training needs of the country. We also rely heavily on digitalized procedures for student loans, free first degree scheme, and our various scholarship programs. We can track applications and trends to gain a deeper understanding of the processes to make our policies more efficient. However, we still have a long way to go in embracing the best tools of the trade. The biggest problem we have encountered is that the data is in different formats for different scholarship schemes. Data not being available in any one place and the statistician not being involved in the planning of the data component of our portal prevents the data being aggregated in the desired manner. This requires more hours of labor on the part of the employees as well. According to my technical team here at the Ministry of Education, data duplication is a common threat experienced by government agencies. It causes a strain on virtual machines or storage hardware, which can cause recovery backup initiatives to fail, resulting in substantial financial loss. Storing and disseminating complete, reliable, accurate data is therefore central to achieving organizational goals and objectives. In other aspects, higher education institutions such as universities require an important amount of knowledge mined from its past and current data sets, using modern methods and processes to help them strengthen their academic programs and delivery. Collecting and interpreting student data helps institutes to predict the paths of students and alumni, tracking success, failures, emerging trends, and other useful insights crucial to keep up with competing institutes. But the challenges are great. Education being one of the least digitalized and most people-intensive economic sectors, the risk of technology-driven disruption is strong. What we observe in the post-pandemic era is that a variety of powerful new platforms and technologies have emerged across the globe, grounded in global computing, enormous data sets, and artificial intelligence. So, as I said before, we still have a long way to go in changing the higher education landscape through data analysis. And I appreciate the efforts of UNDP in building our capacity in this regard. As a global thought leader in sustainable development, UNDP has been a keen ally of the Maldivian government in moving towards the transformational shifts needed. I'm aware UNDP is already working with the government on embedding data-driven policy capacities in our institutions. I'm delighted to acknowledge this contribution of UNDP in the policy innovation and learning space. And I'm confident that the participants will benefit from this dialogue session. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address this gathering, and I wish you all the best this morning. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Minister. We highly appreciate your time and presence at the webinar. We'll now take a group photo of all our speakers and participants. So all participants, kindly switch on your cameras. We'll take a quick group photo. Thank you, participants. Also, we still have a few participants who have not renamed their display names, so kindly rename your display names on Zoom. Please include your full name and your organization. Before we move on to the session, we will now share a Mentimeter link. So we request all participants to join the link. We have a small question for you we'd like for you to answer. Can we have the question, please? You can find the Mentimeter link in the chat box. Participants, please join the Menti link and submit your responses as soon as possible. The link is given in the chat box, and you should also be able to see the responses from your screens now. The question for you is, in your work area, is there an opportunity where timely data could feed into policies for better public service? You may use the Menti link given in the chat box and submit your responses. We have over 60 participants who have joined the Menti link. We request all participants to join the Menti link and submit your responses. We now have over 100 participants who have joined the Menti link. We still have a few more participants to go. Kindly use the link given in the chat box and submit your responses. Okay. Thank you for the responses and thank you for your input. These responses will be further discussed by our moderator during the session. I will now hand over to Mr. Enrico Gaviria, UNDP resident representative in the Maldives, to proceed with the session. Mr. Enrico, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's first of all fantastic to be here with you once again. Let me first of all acknowledge and thank personally, Your Excellency the Minister of Higher Education, Dr. Ibrahim Hassan. It's always a pleasure to engage with you, and the fact you made time for us is definitely much appreciated. And I'll come some of the point that you actually raised in your very well delivered speech. Thank you so much. UNDP is very glad to be back on a second session for a high-level dialogue for Visioning Maldives. So this is a series that we have started in the framework of the Executive Enhancement and Enrichment Program, which runs for a couple of years. And we are very much honored, and we take pride of the partnership we have established with the President Office to bring in the regional and global trends of public administration, development policies, and innovation with an array of offices that we do have around the world globe, around 170 countries. So we do have quite a bit of searching to do, but all the times we're trying to bring you the very best we can on the subject matters. And today I'm very excited because we have top-notch colleagues coming into the session. We had last time a session, as you recall, for those who participated on anticipatory governance foresight. We read the feedback and thank you for that. We always, would prefer that this session can actually be run face-to-face, but there's an opportunity of us doing this online, which in fact is the logistic associated to arrange it, with a wide audience that otherwise would be very difficult to manage, I think. So at times, even when COVID has tamed down a bit, I think it's been great that we can still use some of the online technology for webinar, which are very widely used. This, in fact, creates a space of exchange, which is virtual and is at times, easier to manage, at least from the organization side. And I hope you will still find value in that. But thanks a lot for the reply and the feedback in previous sessions. So today has been introduced by our good colleagues at CSTI and of course the ministry itself. It is about data, right? And all is around and all the circularity around it. So, probably the data footprint, right, of everything we do, it's been much more in the last, couple of years, and definitely accelerated by the impact of everything happening remotely and online. And most of the time with the pandemic crisis, there's been an explosion in the diversity and the quantity of data generated globally. And these are presented opportunities from one side, risk, imbalances in accessing means of digital means that still happens around the world, with digital gaps being persistent. But public institutions are now confronted with the challenges, as the ministry rightly said, on amassing information capital to propel us towards achieving, meaningful policies for sustainable development. So this is both from one side, a conversation we need to have around opportunities to inform development, guide decision, and increase efficiency of public administration. On the other side, the risk and the challenges that we have with increased data fragmentation, bias, privacy, cybersecurity, and other aspects we're going through in detail. I would like, we are a bit behind time, so I'll just jump start into the introduction of the speakers. I'm very pleased because, the value here for us is in fact connecting the experiences that we have around the globe. And today we have 3 speakers that are of excellence. So we will start with, of course, we have an introduction has been given on Alexandru Opronenko. He's our head of Regional Innovation Center in UNDP Asia Pacific in Bangkok, UNDP Bangkok. And with him, we are going to look into areas of course, in leading the regional walk around everything which has been dealing with data. This is a core offer for the United Nations Development Program in the digital realm of our Sustainable Development Goals and Strategic Plan. And we have Alex, which comes into the public sector innovation in Asia Pacific, as been leading application of systemic and portfolio design on complex development challenges, application of for example, issues that are related to how to deal with circular economy, issue of development challenges like plastic waste, transition to digital policies. And previous Alex has worked in Moldova with UNDP as a policy specialist, helping us setting up the Moldovan Innovation Lab, a joint venture of UNDP and the State Cancellery of the Government of Moldova. And he also spearheaded the first corporate project based on behavioral insight, and in 2014. So if it's okay, I will then introduce each of the panelists at the moment of the presentation. So I will start maybe with the first presentation from Alex, and we have around 15 minutes each. And from there, then we'll follow up with some of the questions. So over to you, Alex, first, and thanks a lot for your time. And if you can please share. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Enrico, and I hope I'm audible. Well, thank you so much, Enrico, for setting the scene, and thank you so much, Your Excellency, Minister of Education, and also very happy to see other speakers here at the panel, as well as other participants, which are in great numbers. And I'm really very honored and interested to talk about data and its use for public policy. And from my perspective, I'm coming more kind of from with the public policy hat on my head rather than a data innovation person, but a policy person that started looking and exploring the ways how data can make better decisions. And I think that's a very important kind of a distinction, because while there is, of course, a lot of discussion around all the new types of data emerging, and the data being new oil of global economy and so forth, I think from the public policy perspective, at least the value of data is ultimately whether it can improve decisions that bring benefits to people or not. And all the rest perhaps might be less important. So, and for setting the scene, I'm sorry, I'm trying to. For setting the scene, perhaps I would start with the quite clear statement, right, that COVID pandemic highlighted for everyone, and His Excellency mentioned it in the opening remarks, to what extent COVID happened to be a great experiment and shift in terms of governance, and it highlighted, of course, in a very different way the value of the data, but ultimately I think it showed that most of our institutions actually not set up to deal with the challenges of this century, but more importantly, even the tools are perhaps even more outdated than the institutions. And of course, this puts a very huge strain and a challenge as such to the governments and to the decision making in public policy in the coming years. And some of you might remember that in effectively what COVID showed also, that most of the ministers, prime ministers, most of the governments had to make 100% of decisions with 50% of information. There were huge experiments, and an example of from the Maldives that was just shared was exactly about that, how all education suddenly had to become online, right? And Maldives was just one of the many other countries that had to do it. But of course, the thing and the issue with that was, while all those big shifts had to happen, there was striking lack of information as we were moving forward. So with that, I think I would like to open the conversation and the presentations in the panel with three perhaps big question that we are trying to explore. Is one of them is actually, given that COVID showed to all of us that we lack like almost half of information, be it about beneficiaries, be it about citizens, be it about services and policies that need to be delivered, is the question is how we can use all those new types of data that are emerging to really see better what is missing from the picture, and how we can be much more agile in terms of taking decisions that are timely and that are not delayed. The second big question here for me, and you will see the logic where I actually put a lot of emphasis not just on data that is digital, but data that is obtained through other means, is that how we can make this process of taking data and feeding it into decision making, both through digital and physical means, how this can create a better space for engagement of citizens and building trust towards the government that in many countries took hit in the aftermath of COVID pandemic. Perhaps the last thing here is actually what are the next steps for the governments to take forward in terms of building a very different capability to use data for real-time and iterative agile policy making. But I will start perhaps with an interesting example of XHAS emergency cash program that was launched in Pakistan immediately in aftermath of the outbreak of the COVID. And of course, the huge challenge was that they had to deliver that immediate support and response to the citizens in the matter of days. And of course, the conversation was about 9 million families with huge amount of resources that had to be provided to the people who were on the brink of disaster as lockdowns and other restriction measures were instituted, right? So, and Iksan was a good example of this experiment at scale, where government had to react to COVID, plugging together all the available infrastructure, data flows, kind of a back end of all service provision to support that. And of course, while this example is great, I think two challenges we are facing going forward. The first one is that while we experiment at scale and take this kind of a big schemes to life in matter of days, there are some cracks and things that we can miss. So the big question is how we actually can address it and repair as we put those great initiatives on the longer term feed. But another thing, and we to great extent see it across the world, that actually while we're all talking about building back better or really taking lessons from COVID and reshaping the way how the governance happens, we actually also very see to great extent how, in a way, usual routines and cultures are actually back. And while everyone was heralding digital transformation, data-driven policies, actually many governments slided back to the usual way to do things. And what I would like to say here is that one big thing is perhaps, and the risk in this process is to overlook the value of the complexity on the ground. There is this great example from one of the books, like Seeing Like a State, that effectively shows the gaps that many governments are facing, because what they try to see and what their traditional public policy requires is very kind of a ordered and very systematic and clear picture of the reality on the ground, right? And this is how most of our, let's say, statistical offices or administrative data sources operate. And this is perhaps represented by the picture of the forest on the right side, while at the same time the reality on the left side is very more complex, is much more complicated, and at the same time can be very much confusing, right? And we, of course, in this setting, we would be lacking those 50% of information that is required. And that, of course, drives the important challenge to effective delivery of public policies. And this is why many public policies are failing. While talking about this, I think we have been looking at the lessons emerging in different countries in terms of how these digital data-driven responses were rolled out. And of course, what we started seeing that in many places, the way the policies were designed is a very kind of an ideal picture based on where the digital data can be collected and can be structured by the government. And that unfortunately left important strata of population outside of initial benefits of this response. One of the examples was how India was improving on the go its vaccination process, because at the beginning, to great extent, when the vaccination rollout was made mostly by digital means, a lot of people who were not having not a meaningful access to digital infrastructure, internet, were left behind, and those policies had to be recalibrated. So what I would like to give you perhaps one of the examples, again, coming from India, where UNDP works together with the government of Telangana to actually explore the ways how we can repair and address this gap between data that is available digital and perhaps could give a good overarching average of what's happening on the ground, with much more granular approaches that would actually give us not only the picture of what is happening, but why it is happening. So in this particular case, we are working with the government of Telangana with exploring of ways how data can be used to support climate resilience agriculture. And what we are trying to do is to combine two different ways to collect data and to use it. One is obviously much more kind of a fashionable, and I would say sexy, the way how we can use satellite imagery data that is taken from the satellites, together with the perhaps much more mundane and less curious way of kind of ethnographic research and understanding exactly the motivations and what actually explains the changes on the ground. The whole logic of it is for us is to understand why we have very good exceptions of farmers having very resilient agricultural practices in front of the changing climate. Satellite data gives a very good opportunity for us to understand where those pockets of excellence and what we call of positive deviance exist, right? So people effectively being in the same conditions, but having very different outcomes in terms of crop resilience in face of climate change, and then going there with the ethnographic research and trying to understand what exactly they are doing different and why, and how obviously those practices can be spread through communications or peer-to-peer engagement between the farmers in Telangana. But at the same time, you as decision makers would imagine how this data then can be used to inform decisions in terms of seeds allocations, what type of seeds allocation, what practices and trainings the state government can support, and so forth. So in this way, we would have a very practical use of combination of two data sources, the satellite one and ethnographic research, and we wouldn't be missing that important human dimension of why people do things differently. And we would propose something that would be accepted by them and that they culturally would be eager to take forward. Another interesting example is what we are doing together with the team in Pakistan, where we understand that due to high migration rate and still significant part of the people, because of that, or because of the cultural norms as well, being off the digital record, what we are trying to do is to supplement the existing digital data with what we call digital deep listening, but effectively using tools of sentimental analysis and scanning and screening of the social media to complement existing data with the ones that is missing, and kind of using those narratives and stories that emerge from the marginalized and excluded people to inform and to plug into decision making, so that in this case, the city of Karachi could redesign their social support policies and to start including those excluded and marginalized groups. That perhaps is really an important element for us, right? To see and to understand that the digital and data is not a panacea, and we shouldn't be expecting having all kind of this perfect 100% information by digital means to be able to deliver relevant policies. But I think another important realization, and you remember my second big question in the opening framing, is about okay, we can of course see citizens as just users of the services, and we can improve the data flows to make the services that we provide to citizens more relevant. But I think there is a much more important dimension to citizens being beyond users, but actually how we can ensure that people have the voice and can be part of the decision-making process. And I would give you perhaps two examples from another country in Asia, which is Indonesia, where in the province of West Java, a group of data scientists and enthusiasts was able to create real-time data sets that would be informing government of the province of when the next peak wave of COVID pandemic comes. And so that would allow an anticipatory decision-making in terms of instituting lockdown before the COVID peak hit. Again, I think what is really important here first, we know that governments often lack capabilities or lack enough of kind of these digital powers that often sits with the private sector. And this is an example when you actually can get that support in the crisis conditions coming on time with expertise from outside of the government. So the key question here is also how to build the trust and actually engage those groups of enthusiasts and experts to support government decision making, not necessarily training all your staff to be able to do that. But secondly, it also shows to what extent this collective intelligence sits outside of the government and to what extent can enable really proactive responses from the public sector. Another example, and you see I'm going by blocks, right? Another example is from Indonesia as well, but this is a project that is jointly done by the government and UNDP in the country office, and this is an example of a Lapor platform. This is actually a huge, enormous kind of a feedback loop digital mechanism for people to communicate with the government and to provide their grievances and then receive the feedback. And the system allows actually to track and to see to what extent those grievances were taken into account, how they were responded. Obviously, we see numbers there, but again, what I'm going at here is that this is another important mechanism where you can use data and digital not just inform your decisions, but actually to start developing a bilateral relationship with citizens and start enabling citizens to make contribution to improved service delivery. And perhaps I would guess I'm also running a bit short of time. So another example that I would be happy to use here, missed one, no, okay. Another example that I would use here is perhaps from Government of Canada, and it goes to the third question that we had, is about actually what it means to develop and to build around to build capabilities in the government around data, around digital transformation, and around policy making. And one of the good examples of that kind, where governments kind of are responding to this challenge of dealing with complex challenges, but at the same time dealing with uncertainty and lack of that perfect picture of 100% data, would be Government of Canada, that started a bit earlier. And why the approach is interesting, because it takes an ecosystem perspective. So what they try to link is data officers across the government together with digital officers with the government, and together with the folks who respond for the policy results and outcomes. So in this way, the first step, of course, was to be able and to ensure that at least policies that are being designed have this kind of a solid data footing, and actually government is able to track and to trace the way how the policies are delivered. The second thing for them was to link all this important data and digital infrastructure to the team that was doing foresight. And as I heard from Enrico, your first meeting was dedicated to that. So the Government of Canada has a team called Policy Horizons. And what they started doing now is seeing how they can link data to support it more predictive, more foresight-based analysis for the policies. The ultimate state here, once this being done, the team actually does across the government sense making, which is also actually part of what UNDP does across the region, to address emerging gaps between what is there in the policy, what is their reality, and what is the North Star vision that the government has going forward. Again, the point here is not just kind of to imitate or to copy what Government of Canada does, but I think what's really important is this ecosystem perspective, understanding that just having a strong data flow is not enough for effective decision making. Having a good understanding of what's happening on the ground is not necessarily enough to be really anticipatory and to be responding to future challenges that the government has. So this is kind of the way how this particular government tries to combine those elements. And perhaps I would close with the last thing. As Enrico said, from the regional center, we are trying to drive our own opportunities for governments to engage and to learn from each other on the data-informed policy. And together with the Rockefeller Foundation, we'll be launching this month, end of this month, the Data for Policy platforms that would be bringing together key government decision makers from the partner countries. You had one, India, but we have quite a lot of work happening in the Philippines and a couple of other countries like Indonesia. And we obviously are looking forward to engaging you in this work that is very much about sharing experiences, but also building your data policy experimentation capability for future policy pilots. And with that, I would conclude that perhaps with this complex, fluid reality, the best way to learn is to experiment and to test those data approaches together with the policymakers. Over to you, Enrico.
Thank you very much, Alex. So much appreciated. First of all, very intense presentation, as well as very wide in terms of examples and pick from the several countries. You know, I pick a couple of thoughts from that. I mean, most of us, right, and most public institutions were not, in fact, set up to have data experiences, right? They were set up to have a people experience. And then, in fact, the measure of a successful public institution was how that experience with people were actually going. And the data is a new variable there, which is now entering into the picture. I was intrigued by some element of sentimental data that you mentioned about, which was about how this is actually managed beyond the quantitative element of footprint that we can have in everything we do, but is everything which is basically expressed online, and that in fact can be reached out from particularly analytics that we can have, for example, on social media. But let me jump into then the next speaker, and then we'll come back later with a couple of questions. We have a bit of catch up to do, but I definitely don't want to eat up the time of our next colleague. So I will go with Ms. Sanuka Samadar, Advisor SDG of NITI Aayog. She has been in a senior leadership position across sectors of industry, multilateral and bilateral negotiation, rural development, several departments of India state of government of Uttar Pradesh. She presently leads the SDG efforts of government of India in capacity advisory of SDGs and NITI Aayog, where she led the development of the SDG India Index, SDG localization efforts with the subnational governments, including monitoring system and capacity building, the development of national multidimensional poverty index, and business sector engagement on SDG, among others. I'm very pleased to introduce you, Mr. Samadar, also functions as India focal point for the country on voluntary national review of the 2030 agenda, and as presented India VNR in our United Nations headquarters in New York in 2020. Regular participation on that since 2019. She has been representing NITI Aayog and Government of India with our colleagues at ESCAP in several SDG forums since 2018, and in the G20 forum since 2019. Mr. Nuka, I mean, it's an honor to have you here today, and thank you very much for sharing some of your thoughts. In practice, there's a wide array of experience, so we'll definitely benefit. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Enrico. Thank you so much. A very good morning to everybody. His Excellency, Dr. Hassan, my colleagues from UNDP and participants in the program. It's absolutely an honor to be representing the National Institution of Transforming India, which is the nodal agency for the sustainable development in the entire country. And let me, ladies and gentlemen, take you through that entire concept of how does a country like India harness data across all sectors for triggering action. We firmly, in this National Institution for Transforming India, which we call NITI Aayog in short, we firmly believe that finally what gets measured only gets done. And therefore, that's the lesson that we've derived, in terms of our continuous work across the SDG framework. So you'll understand that obviously when, there is a theory part of it and there is a praxis part of it. The theory part of it is definitely that the power of data, the power of statistics has to be leveraged for triggering action. And what I show in front of you today is how a country of 1.3 billion population, a federation of 36 subnational governments has actually managed to do it using that entire framework of SDGs, which is the most comprehensive development framework that the world has seen so far, with 193 countries. India is also committed towards the achievement of these targets, 169 global targets, the national targets, the subnational targets by the year 2030. So what I'm trying to tell you is not only it's the monitoring of the outcome, the outputs, the inputs, the schemes and programs, but it is finally what we believe is the focus on development outcomes, the big broad outcomes and the targets. That is the key towards effective policy making, towards effective decision making, and towards mid-course correction. One can, Nitya, go back. So NITI Aayog is the nodal agency. What we try to do in the SDG framework is we build a spirit of competition among all our subnational units. Because India is a federation, much of the policy-making, decision-making powers lie with the states and union territories. So we try to spur a spirit of competition by creating a process of ranking and indexing, which actually accelerates development outcomes. And what we also try to do is develop this entire spirit of collaboration where states and union territories, they learn from the good practices of each other. So I'll take you straight away to SDG monitoring, because we firmly believe that the SDGs provide that overarching framework which cuts across all the three dimensions of development, be it the social and human, the economic and infrastructure, and the environmental, and also the governance aspects. So how does one create an overarching framework, leverage it, create that entire monitoring mechanism focusing on development outcomes is what I will try to show you in the next couple of slides. So, with the SDG India Index, as Enrico just mentioned, we became the first country to develop a government-led subnational measure for all the SDGs, for all the 16 SDGs, barring the 17th one of partnerships, to create a framework which will monitor the progress of not only the country, but also of our subnational governments, and then taking it forward to the level of more granular entities, which are administrative units, which we call districts. So what does the SDG India Index do is something which we would like to share here. It has a huge coverage. It uses basically a wide gamut of indicators which are aligned with the global indicator framework, the 169 targets of the SDGs across all spheres of development under the sun, and helps us to set the Indian national priorities. It has very high resolution because it is disaggregated to the level of states' performance across all sectors of the 17 global goals. Very actionable. So very clear-cut, concise insights on a huge range of development areas come across from these indices, and these show what should be the priority for a region, for a state, for a country, or of the scale of India. Definitely, it helps in progress monitoring because this is annually updated. Every year, we keep on updating. That's where the real time and the dynamism of that entire process comes in. And this high frequency of it actually will show to you how it leads to that spirit of competition where every state, every subnational unit is actually competing with each other to scale even go beyond the bars set. Localization, definitely. What we do at the national level, we do it customize it at the regional level, at the sub-regional level, because of the huge diversity that a country like India brings in. So definitely, what the biggest challenge to creating this and institutionalizing a framework, a data-based monitoring framework on the SDG paradigm, the first challenge was building the capacity, the statistical capacity of across the nation. So this is what we did, a huge technical outreach, a sensitization, building the appetite of all our state governments in terms of what the SDGs are. What is the data system that is required? How does one amplify that data system and strengthen and create very robust statistical systems after understanding the gaps? So this is the kind of outreach that we've done in the last couple of 3 years. So a little bit on the SDG India Index, that has also grown in the last few years. One can see that the baseline report, when we started it, it was very narrow. It covered only 13 goals. And you can see the progress when we did the third edition. It covers all the 16 goals. And this shows how our statistical systems are also coping with the huge pressure that SDGs bring in terms of identifying, creating new indicators, tier 2, tier 3 indicators where methodologies are not there, using technology to fill in those gaps and create the data systems not only at the national level, but at the very, very granular level of the districts. So yes, this is what you would like to see, and this is what we would like to show. What does a progress monitoring system, which is based on development outcomes, lead to in a process in a span of 2 to 3 years? You can see the reds are the worst, the most backward states of the country. Yellows are performers better, and the greens are much better, the front runners. You can see how the states have moved. The reds have graduated to yellow. The yellows have graduated to the green part. This actually is the evidence as to what a database monitoring system leads to in the long run or in our development trajectories. This is a system of ranking of how we do it. So we'd be happy to share in detail with our participants and the government of Maldives whenever there is a more detailed session on these things. So this, again, what we showed you is the region, and now we show you the sectors. So what a sectoral picture as to where the countries, where the strengths are. So clearly where the negatives are, where the challenges are. So here you can see that when we do an analysis of how the country is performing across the 16 SDGs, clearly the first 5 are the social goals, and then the infrastructure. We are doing pretty well on infrastructure. But yes, the reds, nutrition, gender, we know that there are issues, there are challenges in this part of the world. And yes, you can see it right there. And this actually gives us the insights of where policies should attribute, where policies should focus, where resources should go, where a lot more thinking needs to be done. So again, a bird's eye view of how the SDG India Index dashboard looks like. So here you can see the states over there. The topmost, basically to my left top corner, are the states and the sectors which are doing well. And you can very clearly see that the bottom right corner has all the reds. So clearly the sectors of nutrition, of climate action, of again gender, these are largely the reds. And one can very well identify that the states in the southern part of India are doing well, who are on the topmost. And again, some of the states in the northern part of India need a lot more focus. Again, so localization of SDGs is our mantra, and definitely along with that what gets measured gets done. So we don't restrict ourselves only to the level of subnational governments. We take it down to the level of our districts. Now our country is divided into, the smallest administrative units, around 705. And for this, we did a new regional SDG index, because this actually is customized to the basic essential needs of the northeastern region of the country, which has 8 states, very distinct, very different, unique in terms of its cultural diversity, unique in terms of its agroclimatic zones, Himalayan region, slightly cut off, issues of challenge, issues of connectivity. So we developed this very granular SDG index for the northeastern region, which focuses into the district part, primarily to understand which are the critical sectoral gaps and how does one kind of create policies and interventions at all possible ministries, whether it's the central government ministries or at the level of the state governments, to attribute these gaps. So a little bit of picture on how the districts look like. So this is the northeastern region for you. And here we have all the districts mapped in terms of their performance. Again, to reiterate, greens are better than the yellows, and there are no reds in the composite picture. Next. Now, composite actually is something which hides a lot of granular truths. So when we do a deep dive into each goal. So goal 2, nutrition. Now you see there are so many reds in districts in this entire region where the prevalence of underweight, stunting among children, anemia among women and adolescents is a big problem. Again, let me show you the goal 3, which is about health. So there are challenges of immunization, institutional births and health personnel, because this is a far-flung area, very sparsely located population, hilly areas, hilly terrain. And therefore you can see that there are districts who are largely in the red zone. What's the policy takeaway from here? This is where the state governments, the ministries, the central governments, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, the ministries dealing with nutrition, they target their interventions, they pass the proposals, and they focus their energies and resources in these particular areas. Again, a picture of how the districts are performing across sectors. Clearly, you can see the number of reds in goal 13 is very high, largely because it's a sensitive zone. It is prone to disasters. It has problems of resilience, and therefore the number of districts in the red zone are far more. Again, if we see goal 9, which is about connectivity, as I already mentioned, the region has issues of digital, physical connectivity, which is amply evident from here. Again, this is largely a picture of, I'd just like to show you as to how statistical systems are also challenged. So one can just see the gray part in all the states. These are the 8 states of the northeastern region. We have data for almost all, but see the grays. The grays show that some of the districts do not even have the basic data which is required for effective decision making. And this is the challenge that we are trying to address year after year while trying to build very robust statistical systems at the most granular level of the districts in the country. I'll take you quickly through the multidimensional poverty index. We are very proud of our national multidimensional poverty index, which has been developed in collaboration with UNDP. UNDP is our standing partner, not only in SDG localization, but more so also in the multidimensional poverty index. So we have the system. Now, multidimensional poverty index is something you'll realize that is again, it cuts across all the standard, parameters of health, of education, of the basic essential requirements for a good standard of living. So how did we create our national multidimensional poverty index? By creating this institutional synergy through the, bringing in all the related ministries, as you can see in front of you, who are related with all the dimensions of multidimensional poverty index, supported ably by Oxford Poverty Human Development Initiative and UNDP. What is the multidimensional poverty index and how strong are the robust statistical systems which can contribute to defining what the poverty is, to redefine poverty in terms of its multiple dimensions of health, education, standard of living. You can see the parameters right over there. And what it helps us to do is not only identify who is poor, also identify how poor are the poor and who is that, the most vulnerable section, primarily to assess as to how does one target the poorest of the poor so that nobody is left behind. So this is what the multidimensional poverty and the statistics now, the data in front of you, this is a very data-oriented program, so I'll stress on that. So these are the kind of findings, 25% of India's population was multidimensionally poor in the year 2015. This is the baseline report. We are working on the current report, which will shortly release based on the 2021 statistics. So what we see is 25% was the headcount ratio in 2015. And now we show you as to how granular the power of MPI we have made it, how strong the power of MPI has been. So again, we go subnational, we do a complete ranking based on the numbers of poverty across our states. This is something which every policymaker wants to see. This is the lesson which every policymaker, top policymakers in the states, they want to take lessons out of it, because everybody has the intention of reducing their population, their constituents who are living in the MPI category. So again, the granularity of it, how does one use data to go granular? Because that is the power that we want to give every policymaker, every constituent, every person who is living in these districts as to what are the challenges that are faced and how does one kind of address these challenges through targeted interventions and through resource allocation. So this is a granular picture for you. And now coming to how India stands. So I'll just take 2 minutes of it and show you as to, what is the evidence that is being suggested by very, very robust demographic and health surveys that the country has, which is at parallel with the global DHS surveys. So one can see that, these are the basic essential, and these align very beautifully with the SDGs. This is the basic minimum that every country has to provide following the global, the multidimensional poverty index. So you can see the yellows are 2015 numbers, the greens are the 21 numbers. So one can see that in nutrition there's been a reduction in deprivation of 6.11%. See the deprivations across maternal and child health, in years of schooling, in school attendance, in cooking fuel, huge reductions, 14.5% reduction. Still, there are miles to go. As a country with so much diversity, we obviously face a lot of challenges, but this is what we've been doing, using our data systems, using the existing data systems. What I'm trying to tell you here is data, there is a whole lot of data, as my colleague Alexandra was putting it. But the thing is that for policymakers, for public, for citizens, it has to be projected in a way that it is user-friendly. It gives you insights, it gives you lessons, which one can directly then put it in terms of triggering action at all possible levels, whether it's the civil society, whether it's the business sector, whether it's the government sector. So the power of MPI, again, I'll just reiterate that we love to show our MPI the way we've done it. So from the national, you saw the national view, the sub-national view, we can take it down to the level of the region. As I told you, the Northeastern region is again one of the most challenged regions in the country. And here you see, compared to the national average of 25%, we have 29% is the headcount ratio of MPI poor. There are districts who are doing far worse. There are districts who are doing much better as well. Again, snapshot of how one goes, this is how one addresses the policymakers, the government, and the people of a particular state. This is the state of Andhra Pradesh. Alexandra did mention working in Telangana. We could have shown Telangana as well over here. So we've done this for all the states, and this is what we to every state, that this is what the analysis, this is what data suggests, that these are your red districts, these are your green districts. The ambition being, how do you take the reds to the yellows and the yellows to the green, definitely. So again, a district-wise, what do we show the policymakers? District-wise analysis of headcount ratio, and also do remember the graph which I showed you in terms of the 12 factors which is contributing to this poverty. And that is the kind of analysis we have for every district, as you can see, for the entire country. Next. Again, for each district, the headcount ratio, and then going further is basically what is that exact single factor? Is it education? Is it nutrition? Is it cooking fuel? Is it electricity? What is that single factor which is contributing to, in the highest measure, to the headcount ratio? And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the cue for policymakers at the state level, at the district level, at the central level, to target that area, to target that sector in terms of addressing these issues. Finally, I'll end because I know I've stretched time, and Indians love to talk a lot, but there is so much of body of work which we would like to share with you. So finally, I'll conclude with the fact that, we in India have realized Niti Aayog is one of those, the anchor organizations for bringing together the whole of government approach and moving beyond to the whole of society approach as well. So we firmly believe that it is the SDG and MPI frameworks which cuts across all sectors, which bring together all sectors of development under one umbrella, under one overarching framework. This helps in goal setting for planning. This periodic progress monitoring of state level, of district level, these actually help us to identify the gaps. And this is what helps us in prioritizing. Every region, every district will definitely differ in terms of their priorities and challenge areas. And finally, the focus on outcome indicators and indices at the state and district level helps us actually to target which is to be achieved. The enablers, ladies and gentlemen, finally is that it has to be put in the public domain for everybody to use. Media dissemination and outreach, very important. That becomes a potency of, the power, the potency of a particular public domain tool that is realized with this. And definitely a lot of buying in from primary stakeholders and who are our subnational entities. So we've been trying to do this, and we've been fairly successful in doing this. And this is a snapshot of our work in front of you. Just to sum it up. Next.
Thank you. Yes.
With our work over there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's such a rich display of experience. Ms. Samadad, I think it's great to have gone through it. I think there will be occasion also for us to deepening the conversation as soon as possible. But also, I think it's quite important. I mean, you basically have have to pitch like the realm of possibilities. And you have used some of the examples, some of the roads for policy making. Of course, the SDG plan. Every government has its own also development plan, and then basically, the idea of incentivized data collection, and also to have, in fact, district and states in your case. But here, for example, like I could imagine for Maldives, like in the atoll system, competing to each other to have a sort of data kind of realm of collection, and then basically using that for better policy thinking, better investment decision to justify how budget is should be appropriated, and how, in fact, the progress on the ground are actually being done. I think this is a very interesting topics, and we will move now immediately to our speaker number 3, which is Ashta Kapoor. Is the co-founder of Apathy Institute. Ashta worked at the Planning Commission of Government of India and contributed to the 12th-year plan. She has worked in India on universal basic income, pilot with the Self-Employed Women's Association in UNICEF, 2-time TEDx speaker, and Global Governance Future Fellow 2018-2019. Prior to Apathy, Asta worked at the Future State of Rockefeller Foundation grantee on sharing data for individual empowerment, and we had that before. That we have an emerging partnership with Rockefeller Foundation across the region, and that's going to be very much beneficial for us to have your experience from that side. Let me then introduce Ashta with maybe a couple of reflections, and inviting you to expose around a couple of questions which have been put forward right before from other speakers. So we talk a lot about how the system naturally could look like, right? And the realm of possibility, especially in the relation to data for SDGs or multidimensional poverty index, and basically the upstream level of policy. But how do we ensure buy-in and implementation capacity for data-driven governance across the entire hierarchy of government agencies, right? Especially in a place like Maldives, which is very much dislocated, right? The transmission of capability is not linear. It has to somehow physically challenge and be distributed almost in several pockets at the same time. And then the other part, which was coming very interesting, also from the presentation of the previous speaker and Alex as well, it was how do we collaborate with the private players to access non-traditional actors to obtain data for policy action, which is not everything is in the realm of the public institution. And therefore, what are the incentives of each party to share data? So over to you, Ashta, and I'm sure you'll run through the presentation in the time frame. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Enrico, and thank you to the previous speakers as well. Very happy to be here, we are also a partner with UNDP on the Data for Policy platform. We've been curating the content for them for the platform, and very excited at the possibility of partnering with the government of Maldives through the platform as well. Enrico, I'll answer your questions, but I wanted to also just give my views on the previous conversations, as well as the inputs into the Menti board, which were quite interesting. So I think the question was, how do you think that data can be used in policy making with regard to your work? And I think the audience was divided. So a lot of people did not think that data could be meaningfully used in policy making, which is interesting, because I feel like that's something that also needs to be established, which is that how do we demonstrate the value of data through our work. And the second one is, I think that a lot of people did say yes, but were concerned about, like you said, about capacity. How do we get the right kind of data? If data is available, how do we access it? How do we think about the right use cases for using this data? So I think there's a big gamut of issues that is also coming from the audience and also from the speakers, that data is not a silver bullet. And I'll just start there. So I think that this problem needs to be cut in different ways. The first one is, how do we establish the value of data? We've been saying that data is important, it's ubiquitous, we all need to, use it better, etc. But the government understands it, but for the community, for, like you said, at the last mile, for the private sector, how do we demonstrate the value of data-driven decision making? I think that's a question that we all have to answer very, very specifically. The use cases that Alexandra presented, as well as Sanyukta's very detailed presentation on how India is deploying its data resources to build both monitoring, build more evidence-based policies. That is critical for us to constantly bring forth, which is that data is valuable and should be deployed meaningfully. The second question is on the availability, quality, and usability of data, right? I think that, again, in Sanyukta's presentation, it was clear that there are data dark areas of India. And like you said, Enrico, I'm sure that's the case in, countries like Maldives and other parts of the APAC region, that there are places that are just data dark. And so how do we make sure that when we are developing policies, they are reflecting the needs and interests of everybody and not just the people who are able to produce data and make that usable? So that's another big issue, is like what kind of data is available. The second is, of course, quality of data, right? You may have data on healthcare for all of Maldives, but there may be, issues like, this is a case that happens in India all the time, that a lot of data is hand inputted and then digitized. But because of the scale of the problem, a lot of times the nurses in the village responsible for weighing babies would just put the same weight for every child in the village. So you'll have a name, age 2, and everybody's 7 kilos. So the quality of data also needs to be something that we need to consider. So not just availability, but also quality. Then the third one is the question of accessibility. Once we have data which is of good quality that we can rely on, how do we access it? What are the mechanisms? Who gets access and for what? And then finally, and related to that is also interoperability of data. Again, this is an India problem, which I'm sure is familiar to many members of the audience as well, is that so much of government data lies in PDF forms or in registers in different parts of the schools or hospitals, wherever it's being collected, particularly in our part of the world. So how do we make that data in such a standard that it's interoperable and usable across stakeholders? So those are the big sort of data problems that we need to address. Then come questions of capacity. How do we, build capacity from the ground up within the government to manage this data, to collect it, to clean it, to make sure it's quality, to make sure it's in standards that are interoperable, and then of course deploy it for evidence-based policy making. And then finally also thinking about the community and how do we demonstrate value, create incentives, but also engage the community in accountability through transparency mechanisms, etc. So those are to me the sort of layers of concerns, and they're not concerns as much as things that we have to work out as a community to make data as useful a resource as it can be in the context of policy making. Now, our work, and this is what we've been also trying to do in our partnership with the UNDP, is to see what are the best practices around some of this and how can we harness this value. I'll start with a few sort of key principles that I feel like data-driven policy making needs to be able to encompass. The first is, like I said, value. Value for whom? The government believes that if the government uses data to create opportunities, to send benefits, build schools, make sure that children are able to access those schools, that is value for the community, which is all true because of all the institutions in the world. The government is the one that is duty bound to serve the people. However, what needs to also happen is that there needs to be an unbundling of what the community feels is valuable. So are there ways in which the community can be incentivized to participate more in the data collection and maintenance process if they understand there's value? I'll give you an example. If there's a village that that is in a data dark area, but you're able to say that, okay, if we have quality data on infrastructure in the village, if we collect this data through participatory mechanisms, we will be able to upgrade the infrastructure. Enrico, this goes back to the point you made about the far-flung areas. How can we engage communities much more meaningfully in the process of collecting data, in the process of holding data collection mechanisms accountable, and also then, having the visibility to say, okay, fine, the government collected all of this information about us. What have they done with it? And is there other ways in which we would like to deploy our own information? So I think that process of deliberation with regard to data is critical. The second thing is about, related to this, is also about incentives, right? We need to incentivize the communities and the people on the ground to know that data collection, its use is not a top-down thing. It's something that happens, that has value on the ground, and those incentives need to be clarified. There have been some bizarre suggestions all over the world, such as the data dividends project that Andrew Yang, from a former presidential candidate, has been suggesting, that people should be paid for their data. So if Facebook is collecting data about us, they should just pay us because they make money from ads that are generated from our data. But that's obviously not the case when it comes to the government collecting data, or people who are institutions that are at the core of public value. So is public value an incentive enough is something that we need to examine, and how do we really communicate that back to people is a related question. The third is of trust. And this also relates to the question of how do we engage the private sector on some of this, because of course the data the government has had is not sufficient. So trust is a multi-dimensional problem, of course. So there needs to be trust in the process of data sharing. So how can we create mechanisms that will give the private sector reassurance that the data they share is not being used to quash innovation, for instance, or to well, that's the big one, but also to deploy to give data to their competitors, or whatever the concerns are. Their confidentiality needs to be maintained. The second is, again, public value is a huge sort of incentive for the private sector. We believe that the private sector is not interested in public value, but I think there are lots of examples globally to say that if an Uber or other big tech companies have been brought to the table to say, you need to solve the traffic problem or air pollution problem, and we need data for that, they have been more or less willing. But what they need to be told is how is that data used, how is it kept confidential, how is it deployed by the government for public value. The thought, and also I think critical to that is a centerpiece of our work at APTI, is that what the processes, that the models of data sharing need to also be trustworthy. So how do we make sure that if data is pooled between the government, say of Maldives and Uber, on traffic in Malé, then how is that data kept confidential? What are the mechanisms around that? And also, how are the rights of the individuals whose mobility data is being aggregated safeguarded? So we also need to think much more, which I think that has been missing in our conversation so far, is like, what are the legal rights that individuals, communities, governments, private sector have around data? I think those need to be codified to create the process of trust, and also to make sure that we are able to claim that, okay, my data was misused, etc. So India is still contemplating its data protection bill, and I think that is something that is always going to have to be a starting point for whatever data for policy we use. And then again, finally, I think is tying all of that together through a mechanism of accountability and transparency for data use that I think is becoming more and more important. There are, of course, examples of building solidarities, and we have examples from India, from Estonia, where these infrastructures for data sharing are being created that enable the movement of information between ministries, between governments, between communities. But more on that, hopefully in the question answer. Enrico, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you very much, and it's great. In fact, I do appreciate the fact that for once at least, it's nice not to have also the presentation online, because then definitely the entire attention comes on the message, right? And that is very effective. So very much thankful for that. So I had an initial set of questions for the panelists, but I would rather have the team participating to this do some questions so that we can catch up with the entire program a bit. So if it's okay for you colleagues which have been participating and having heard from our three speakers, there definitely certain areas of interest that could solicit some of your question, all the issue in relation to, how this is relevant for you, right? And how this is, at the end of the day, when you come back today to your desk, you had some, definitely function to perform. And how would that be different if you had, a way of working which would harness data in the way you do it? Would it be that faster? Would it be more difficult? Would you have the capacity to do so? And how that would be relevant for your constituencies, the people you normally talk to in the delivery of your service in the public administration, or even back home for the purpose of your regular interaction with communities. So I'm sure you will have some questions. The way to do this, I think it would be either for the raising of my hands, or maybe putting that into the chat. I see. Thank you, CSTI, to have solicited question on the chat box, or you can raise, of course, your questions, and I'd be happy to give you the floor. Very good. Let me go through we have 15 pages of participants, so to find a high raised hand is going to be a challenge. But otherwise, maybe some question on the chat box. I see also Minister is patiently still with us, and I appreciate that very much, Minister. Very good. There was certainly an element that comes to play, and I received that I think on a private chat box, and so that I read it as is. And this is for Alex, right? And it's a question on combining human intelligence with machine intelligence, right? What is all this machine intelligence about? And because of course there is a lot of data being delivered, and how machine learning, and what does it actually mean for policy making? Do you have an example on how this has been applied? And it's something that you would want to share with the team here. And thank you for the
thanks
question.
Thanks so much, Enrico. Yeah, I'm happy. And actually, you have a great addition to your team that you have proudly stolen from PRH, right? You have Shamin, who is much better than me in terms of machine learning. But I think I also try to give examples, right? And where machine learning is in particularly valuable is exactly when you have to deal with a huge amount of data that you need to structure and to understand the patterns, right? So let's say there was example on the slides that I didn't pick up, but for instance, you are addressing issue of human safety in public spaces, right? And obviously what you can do, you have all the data accumulated at the city level, at the province level, it depends, of course. And you try to kind of pick cues, pick patterns through the data. And of course, doing it manually would be very difficult. I think the achievement of the artificial intellect is exactly that machine can process this data very quickly, right? It's sometimes seconds, a minute, but you effectively have depending on the question of your inquiry, be it a particular geographical area or a particular category, you will have that all kind of processed and disaggregated. And of course, machine learning is also because machines are learning and improve all the time based on this. But then I think where we still humans are much better than machines are actually in kind of this novel inquiry and understanding what is actually happening, not just where or even what, but why. And I think this is where the anthropological, ethnographic, and other approaches come to forth because they actually can complement and can kind of unpack those mysteries and explain why things are happening in a particular way. I would add here, Enrico, also because I think something that we have been discussing this Asta before, and she was kind of touched that point. I think Andrew Natsios, former head of USAID, right? He had this seminal paper on severe measurement disorder that was kind of a plugging public policy and development. And he, I think, rightly mentioned that the things that are most important and valuable are the most difficult to measure. The things that are less relevant for decision making are much easier to measure. This is the irony, right? And of course, I think with the machine learning and this kind of a digital data that we have is very good in terms of giving us an average of what we have in a particular jurisdiction. And I think we need to become much better in understanding the reason and understanding the granularity, right? And that was my experience also working with data. I always was provoking my colleagues from statistical offices, like on poverty, you need to have something real time. On health, you need to have something real time so you can take decisions, right? And effectively, what I realized that the timeliness is not the issue. We were asking a wrong question all the time. So if you look at the health data, right, you would have an example of number of doctors per number of people, or number of hospital beds on average per number of people. When I started talking to people in different communities, what in terms of health services was important for them, they said, oh, you know, our community is so remote from the hospital that we cannot reach it on time. Why does it matter for us how many doctors are there? Right. So I think when we will be able to reach that middle ground using artificial intelligence or not, that would be really a critical juncture. Over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Let's open the floor for any colleagues who would want to ask some questions, and by all means, take the mic. In the event I don't see your hands up, I would.
Rico, I think Shumin had her hand raised.
Yes, we do. Yes, Shumin has. Yeah, Miss Shumin. Yes.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much. And also would like to express my appreciation to all the speakers. I enjoyed the session very much and learned a lot from you. So I will keep my question very short. So I'm really inspired by your sharing, and I'm also working on a data related project. So I'm really curious to know what are the entry points you think that would be useful to cultivate the data-driven culture in the public sector, because this is quite innovative, I think. So I think maybe we will also need to explore something. So I would like to know your thoughts on this.
Thank you, Shumin. Let's have that as a first question. And I also wanted to hear if any colleagues from Maldives on the question board. And also would like maybe, Minister, as we are responding to maybe this question, some of your reflection would be definitely helpful in closure with, before, wrapping it up with a couple of my reflection on the overall discussion. So maybe we can bring that Shumin question to, would Ashta would feel comfortable on this one?
Sorry, I'm not sure if I understood the question, Shumin. Are you talking about like the inroads that governments can make into this innovation?
So I'm asking this kind of the data-driven culture, because I think for some of the government agencies, like the Statistics Bureau, they might have the mandate of using the data. So I think it will come very naturally. But for some of the government agencies, maybe people are collecting some data, but will be using it for a particular purpose, like publishing a report to understand what is happening right now. But actually, there are more potential of using this data. And we can use it for the decision making as well. So it is not just for the research purpose. So I'm wondering how to develop this kind of the culture in the public sector. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not from the public sector, so I can't speak to the development of the culture, but I think what we do need to do is have some demonstrable pilots that show how data collected by various ministries can be deployed to build action and policy responses. And I think once, again, this goes back to the point that I was making about value, is that once we're able to demonstrate the pathways for this, even if it's at a small scale, and I think Sanyukta also mentioned that the massive effort that she demonstrated today did start off as a pilot. So identifying a use case, whether it's about reaching benefits to the last mile or ensuring, out of school children are in school. So identifying a very specific problem and showing how data can be used to build out more informed decisions, I think would be a starting point.
Yeah, thanks,
so much,
Asta, for that. And Minister, I'm sure you have some thoughts on some of these questions, as yourself posed, in fact, at the beginning of the session. Any pearls of wisdom from you, that would be much appreciated indeed.
Thank you very much, Enrico. First of all, I would like to congratulate all the speakers for the wonderful experiences and very rich experiences they have shared with us. I think my colleagues from the Maldives, all key policymakers, would have benefited much from this session. I think there's no doubt about the power of data, but I think we are actually, a lot of us are still yet to be convinced that effective policy making cannot take place in the absence of quality data. And I think through sessions like this, that we are getting convinced that to enable us to make effective policies, we need to have data readily available in the format that is useful for us, and that has been actually highlighted by one of the speakers also. So I think a lot of the work needs to be done, especially in the Maldives. We need to get more, we need to get familiar with the data tool sets that are used in the industry for us to effectively and easily use the data in the formats that we would like. I remember the old days in the government that we used the box files to put in all the documents that we need for the work that needs to be carried out. So the data that's collected in various government agencies in different formats should not be stored in a way we used to store documents in a box file. And that can only be done once we get familiar with the effective tools that are used in the trade. And that this particular point was highlighted a lot when I sat down with my colleagues at the ministry yesterday, when we talked about our efforts to digitalize the work that we do in the ministry. So once again, congratulations, Enrico, and for the team. I think your rich experiences is encouraging us to move in the path that you have already moved. And I think your comments are things that we have for us that will take us a long way. As one of you pointed out, I think what gets measured gets done, as one of you pointed out. And I think I'll remember that statement for a while. Thank you very much.
Minister, thanks. I was certain that when wisdom is requested, I would have pouring that from your window and from intervention. Thanks a lot for that. Colleagues, I mean, definitely this is a session which is, with an array of experiences that have been shared from the region, which is very rich in terms of information sharing, very rich about an experience, right? I mean, you at times we open the window out there, and then what we see is, at times it will take time for fully appreciate and at the same time comprehending details. These dialogues are basically for us to allow an interest and definitely a drive for questions to be put back in your at your seat, right? So that there are things that we can learn from others, that we can share some of the challenges we're facing. And I think it's pretty natural and normal. Of course, at times experiences are advanced of maybe 5-6 years of work or reflection on it, maybe in certain areas. And in fact, Maldives is teaching the world on many areas of the way actually you dealt on things. I mean, let's look, for example, at the way COVID has been responded here. Has been of exemplary modus, and I think maybe is a session we can call some of you to express in other session with other countries. But a couple of reflection and closure. A lot of issues where on data for policies it requires definitely an attention on how do we create data, right? Where data are not there. How do we put the light in the dark spot, as Asta was mentioning before? How do we then treat and generate and ingest this data in a way that we can also be a bit democratic about it, right? It doesn't have to be always a top-down approach of a system that has to be equal for everybody. And if you don't use that software, you will not be able to produce that. Everybody needs to be able to basically live his own experience, regardless of the system of software you will have to do in order to produce that specific data that somebody is valuing and you don't value that much. So I think everything that we're doing, and in fact, this is the big data kind of concept with you, whenever you live your experiences, and now you're using digital means to second that, those data are basically available for captures, right? And to be captured. And then, of course, how do we treat the data is basically an investment of public and private institutions. Public institutions do that much more than public. In order for us to basically to treat the information, which is much wider than normally we would imagine for. And then how do we represent that in a way which is synthetic, immediately available, not only for policymakers, but also for public, because at the end of the day, you are a generator of value and you should actually be in full appreciation of that thing. This is not only for policymaking, it's also for demand on the wider public. You know what the value of that, and as part of that, you actually demand service that would pair with the value that you have been given. And I will not open the Pandora box of monetary value of data. I'm sure there will be a lot to talk about it. I will not open another Pandora box of the rights and the rights system and the legal protection system around data. That would open, of course, maybe another conversation. But let me close with one thing. When I started this job, right, and I think all of us in public institutions started a job, we were good professionals if we would meet people and if we would experience sharing, right? Nowadays, it turns out that you are probably a much better professional in my seat or in your seat if you have information about people, which is much more than that interaction can have. I am a bit of bias. I will still vote for having a human experience towards an adult experience of yourself. But I'm sure, I think if we smartly use that for the good of the communities we're trying to serve, I think this would be an immense value addition to us. Let me thank, of course, Minister, for your for gracing this event and for the interaction with us. It's always a pleasure to interact with you. Let me thank, of course, the President Office for allowing us to this second occasion of interaction with you. Let me thank, of course, our speakers. And Alex, thanks a lot for your time. I know you're busy on the regional side, but also you put forward a panel of absolutely top-notch experts. And I'm very pleased. I think she had to leave very quickly for an emergency. I hope nothing is wrong with our senior advisor, Sanyuka Samadar from India. and from the government of India. And of course, Ashta, it's been wonderful to meet you online. And I hope we will have occasion as well for you to come over maybe once in the Maldives to have a live experience also with colleagues. I also see, of course, CSTI is very much appreciated. We have, I see now a couple of questions came on the ground, which are very much in terms of platform, and I think it could be good to have there's an email that we can be sharing and information that can be further looked at. And then there are some elements. So what we can do also, we can solicit some of the questions and maybe provide some of the answers. Maybe you think this is an open channel, right? So we will definitely remain committed. Colleagues, thanks a lot for your time. CSTI, thanks a lot for having arranged this again. We hope you found it useful. We will read carefully your feedback. And once again, thanks a lot for the experience, and much appreciated your time. You have a good day.
Thank you, Enrico. Thank you, colleagues. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, speakers, and thank you, participants. We have shared a Google form to collect feedback, so we really appreciate if you could fill up the form and share your feedback with us. Also, we have shared a link for registration purposes, so please fill up the forms. Thank you so much for your time and presence. We do have a few more webinars coming up in this series of Visioning Maldives Leadership Dialogues. So hope to see you all. Thank you.